excited to start this week's show by inviting in our next guest who is running for Larimer County Clerk and Recorder. It is my friend Wyatt, and I can't wait for you to meet him if you haven't already, to get to learn more about all the great things that he's interested in when it comes to the town or the clerk and recorder. Why do I keep wanting to say that wrong? The clerk and recorder role. So, Wyatt, I would love for you to introduce yourself to everyone.
Hi, everyone, and thanks, Don, for having me and the Larimer Dems for putting on this amazing platform. Yes, I am long name Wyatt Schwendeman-Curtis. It will be on the ballot that way, so just look for the longest name on the ballot. I think it'll be me, and then Jody has like the next longest. I think I'm slightly longer than hers. So, you want both of us. So just think of it that way.
Yeah.
And I am running for Larimer County's clerk and recorder position. And for those that don't know, most people listening to this podcast probably know, but the clerk is the head elections job for the county. So we certify the elections and hand out all the ballots and do much more, which we'll talk about in a little bit.
Look at you. You are a pro. You're like filling in gaps. You've got this going. I love it. So, you there's several things. One is I'm interested in knowing why you're running for this position right now. Why this time instead of, sometime in the future?
So that's a great question. And originally, I was looking at running for this position in 2026 when the seat was supposed to be open. So technically, this is considered, and I will put it in quotations, a special election, even though it's not classified as a special election. But our former clerk and recorder, Angela Myers, got reelected in 2022 and then left 5 months into her term, and that opened up the seat. And she had been in the office for, I want to say, about 14 years, a long time. And obviously she was ready to retire and move on, and she lives somewhere else now, which is great. But it opened up the seat sooner. So I wanted to make sure that that the county had an option to vote for someone different and someone new. So that was the biggest thing. And I knew that this seat was going to be, yet again, it was supposed to be open in 2026. So I was hoping I had a little bit more time to plan for it. But I had already knew that I wanted to run for this back in 2022, knowing that was Angela's last time running. So I was just waiting until she was gone, because it's really hard to be an incumbent, especially a very popular incumbent. And so I was like, we'll just let her finish out her last term. And she left early. So I was like, let's do it. And then the biggest reason that I'm doing this is because I'm a data nerd. So I like numbers. So what I do in my day job, or what is paying me currently right now, I am a demand planner and a forecaster for Noosa Yogurt out of Bellevue, Colorado. And I love data. And I knew that if I was wanting to get into politics, I was wanting to do something that was data driven and not really policy driven. I love policy, but I'm definitely more passionate about numbers. And after working on multiple campaigns throughout Larimer County and the state, I saw ideas to improve in the clerk's office to release data to the public. So this is why I decided for this position specifically, because it works in data and you are releasing numbers constantly. And it's all about historical data and how elections are run and the numbers that how people vote. But yet again, this office is much more than just elections, but it is the majority of what the job is.
It's at least the part that everybody is paying a lot of attention to for a short amount of time. So, as you say, there are other things. And I think most of us kind of forget that they're all under one umbrella. I know I am like, oh yeah, I didn't realize that was in that office too. And every time I go to the office for something different, I'm like, oh yeah, okay, it is all part of the same umbrella. So if I'm remembering right, it's titles and licenses and a whole bunch of the things that are really like how our local government functions is really being kind of managed in that office. So also a lot of data in that you make sure, or that office makes sure, you in a few months will make sure that, the stuff that needs to be recorded is actually accurately recorded, which is important. And I know that in the past, I've heard you talk also about some of that other work and why that was important to you. That it's obviously the elections are a big deal, and I'm sure we'll circle back to some of that and what you want to do there. But um, what else? Why else
Yeah,
is the clerk and recorder important?
yeah. I mean, the job is clerk, but there's two parts to this title, clerk and recorder. This is a management and data job, not a policy job. You are following state statutes. You're not implementing, or you're implementing policy, but you're not passing legislation. You can help guide state legislatures on policy that affects like elections. And we have an organization that become part of, which is the Colorado Clerks Association, that does influence state legislature bills. But there's three departments that this office controls or works or does. And the biggest one is the elections department. The next one would be the motor vehicle licensing department, which means when you get your sticker on your car every year, that is through the clerk's office. That's who you pay. That's how you register your vehicles. So that is through the clerk's office. So, and what's great about something that Angela did is you'll see in places like Fort Collins, and I think there's one in Loveland, there's kiosks people can go to and get their sticker at like a King Soopers. So these do exist, which is really awesome and fascinating. I would like to expand on that for smaller communities, but it's also really simple because you can also just pay online or write a check and then they can mail it to you. But there are people who also like to wait last minute or forget or whatever. So they can just go to a kiosk instead of going to the main clerk's office and having to wait in line and get their sticker that way too. But expanding those resources to other communities like Berthoud, Wellington, I'm not sure if Estes Park has one, but the smaller communities that are further away from where the hub is, which would be, there's an office in Fort Collins, Loveland, and Estes. And then we have all of these other communities that have to drive to these offices. So just making sure that they have easier access to resources. And then the last thing is the records department, which you had just brought up, deeds to houses. It's also, if you ever get a fine from the sheriff's office, you actually pay it through the clerk's office. So that is a fun little tidbit. Working with your other departments throughout the county. And then passports, we also deal with passport applications, and then marriage licensing. And I actually talk about this probably the most besides elections on the campaign. I'm part of the LGBT community. I'm a gay man and married to my husband for almost 4 years now. And the Supreme Court has already started attacking rights on women with abortion rights. And they've talked about how they want to go after marriage rights next. So this would just not, this is where we have to figure out ways of how do we protect same-sex marriage. And as a clerk, I think it's important for people to understand, like, yes, I'm having to implement the law and whatever's in place, but being a clerk in Colorado is still not protected. We might have passed it years ago, and it's currently same-sex people can go get married. But if the Supreme Court overturns it, our Colorado Constitution and our state statute currently states that marriages between a man and a woman. So if that does not change, it reverts back to what the current law is. I don't know how that process would work, but as a clerk, that's where my influence can come in and work with CCA, which is the Colorado Clerks Association, the state legislature, the voters, to see if we can codify it and change that process in the future. So that way, if the Supreme Court does decide to do something crazy again, we can protect those rights. But it's also crazy is when they wrote the opinion on Roe versus Wade for the overturn. It wasn't just same-sex marriage that some of the justices were talking about bringing back up. It was interracial marriage. So people need to realize, like, this is like threats across all sorts of protections that we feel like are in place and not under threat, and they are under threat. There's a lot. There's a lot.
Yeah, and it doesn't make me upset at all to the point that I can barely talk. It's, just kidding. It really does. Yeah, I remember actually that there were some nice little foreshadowing in that ruling. If it wasn't bad enough, they wanted to make sure to really get us all out and active. And I think in the spirit of trying to really hone in on what we can do and what can make a difference in a time when some of these things are very overwhelming and can, set us on edge. And frankly, that's what turns people off from some of this stuff, is not knowing what to do. I think this conversation is part of it, right? Is knowing who's doing what and who we're electing and what they're informed about and engaged in, and how are they going to show up and do the job every day. And I think it's easy to take this for granted. The clerk and recorder is something that most of us think about when we have to look up where to go. And in my case, I'm the one who does need it because I already was late and all that. So I'm very excited about the kiosks. I actually wrote that down for my own sake to remember that I have that option. And, just understanding, though, that there is so much more to this. This really is impacting day-to-day things, the things that we take for granted, like who's living in my house with me and what our legal protections are. It's kind of a big deal. And I think that for so many people who are relatively new to the area, there are a lot of things about Colorado and our laws that it's kind of doesn't match, right? Like, it's like, oh, we don't have that already, is something that most people are finding out almost every day. I've lived here my whole life, and there's still stuff like that where I was like, I thought we figured that out, and turns out it didn't pass or whatever. And so, getting involved, getting engaged, knowing what people are going to do, how they're going to do it, what they're thinking about the job, and how they're engaging with other people to talk about what's important is a big deal, which is one of my favorite things about you, is that I always learn something every time I talk to you. And so far, we've only talked about data once, which is where I was sure I would learn things from you. It's always, policy even, that you've got some great things to share. So I'm just putting that plug out there for anybody who is wanting to get involved, because this is a race. You've got a contender. Angela left and they seated somebody temporarily who's decided to run. Isn't that the case? Is that right? Okay. And so it's important. We don't want to take it for granted because, marriage is on the line. And who's to say what other marriages they might loop in? I mean, if Clarence Thomas is thinking about questioning his own marriage, then I'm pretty sure everybody's marriage is on the deck, you know? So it's a big one. So thank you for putting yourself out there. I do remember hearing also that there's only a handful of people who are in the LGBTQ community openly. Um, they're openly running, but they may not be openly in the LGBTQ community. There's only what, 5 people in the whole state this year? Is that right? Something like that? It's not very many.
It's very small. Did did I my volume's still good, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's a very small amount. We have I think it's 5 to 10 LGBT people statewide that are running. Larimer County, I only know, and I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong, but I only know currently elected is Joan Janal, who's a state senator from Fort Collins, and Amy Doran, who is a Board of Education member in Thompson School District. Those are the only two that I am aware of that are part of the LGBT community in Larimer County. Joan Janal is term limited, so that means we're going down to just Amy Doran. And hopefully it will be me. I will be added to that list if the voters decide to elect me.
Yeah, we'll
Yeah.
keep our numbers at least.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm saying that to put some pressure on people I know, people I don't know, who might be thinking about what's next for them. Because I also think representation matters. And when you shared that information and I heard that the first time, I went, that's definitely something that's worth, putting our eyes on, is just, are we seeing ourselves in the people that are doing the work every day? And if not, then it's a great reason for us to think about getting more involved. No pressure for anyone who's debating it, but if you are already thinking about it, representation matters. So thank you for representing. Thank you for representing openly. And now I want to go back a little bit to the elections. So we talked about that for a minute, but I know that in the last, I don't know, 8 years or so, elections and election security has been kind of a big deal. So I was hoping to talk a little bit more about why people don't want to take this for granted for that too. And my cat wants to say hi.
Yeah. So I think it's extremely important, and one of the reasons why I also decided to step up now versus waiting is elections are under attack. We had January 6th. We have election denialism from 2020 that has boiled over. And Colorado and Secretary of State Jenna Griswold has done a great job at this, along with the Republican and Democratic clerks statewide, besides one person, has made sure that people can trust their elections in Colorado. And I will refer to that one person in a second. But most of the clerks statewide we've had no issues of fraud, no issues of tampering. We run very safe and secure elections, and there should be no question about what's happening in our current elections. And when the numbers come out in Larimer County, we have tight elections. People have won by 1 vote. People have won by 5 votes, by 500 votes. They are not by thousands of votes. We are talking about like people are winning by just very small margins. So people that are always like, should I vote? Your vote does matter. We see it in Larimer County all the time. It literally, in the past 4 years, I think we had 3 elections that were won by single digits. So it is very important to get out and vote. But we always are making sure that people are aware of the process. And one of the things that I would like to actually talk about is that one thing I really want to improve on the Larimer County Clerk's Office is something that Jefferson County is also doing currently. The clerk and recorder from that county, Amanda Gonzalez, was elected, I want to say 2020 22, sometime around there. And she has done a phenomenal job about being transparent in the process of elections. So, like, she went to the facility where the ballots were printed and actually showed people this is where your ballots are printed, showed the ballots being offloaded from a truck, so people could see the whole process from beginning to end, obviously protecting privacy. So there's no privacy issues, but I think it's fascinating because it engages the voters and residents of that county and shows them, oh, this process is actually how it works and is very secure. I mean, you can see the security guards, you can see whatever is happening. It is very tightly run, and that's the job of the clerk, right? We are there to ensure that these elections are without a hitch and no problems. So I think it's very important to start implementing that at our county also, and just being transparent. I'm a young candidate. I'm 35 years old, and I love it when I see, I think the younger generation is all about transparency. And I would say any generation is about that right now, especially with everything that's happening. They really want to see what's happening. We live in a social media online era. People want to know what's happening right now. So we have to make sure that we are being as transparent through that process as possible.
Yeah,
So
especially with the the scrutiny in this specific area, right?
and it's also currently, this was in 2022, so this fact could be a little old, but I know in 2022 we were still rated as one of the last counties in reporting in election numbers, and which is fine. That means Angela was taking her time and being methodical through the process, which is very respectable. But we see in counties close to us, like Boulder County and Jefferson County, have a higher rate, where meaning that they report faster, still have no issues with how they're moving along in their process. So I would love to see our numbers increase, and to where, being a former campaign staffer, I understand the frustrations on campaign side from people who are waiting for numbers and just want to know what's happening. And that can be just as simple as, like, for example, if there's a delay in the process and we run into a snag because it's extremely close election by 2 votes or whatever, it's just being transparent in that process and letting people know versus giving them the, hey, we'll get back to you in 7 days, this is what we have to do in between hand, or this is, we'll get back to you tomorrow, without giving really a lot of detail. It's kind of ambiguous. So I'd like to give a little bit more detail and facts in the process so that way people don't feel as stressed during that time. And it just, yet again, we live in a day and age when people want to know now, and we can't always tell people right now, but we can at least tell them what's happening in the process right now.
Yeah, yeah. I can say that it'd be really nice to have it sooner, and it would be really nice to know for sure, when it's gonna happen, because it is like the longest minutes of your life wondering when we're gonna get information. And I know that it's not much easier as somebody who voted. If you're watching and you're concerned about a race and you're in Larimer County where things are close, there are definitely people who are watching it nonstop. And so it's nice to know that information. Um, so I remember that this position you might be the first Democrat running for this position. Is that right?
Yeah, yet again, if someone knows different, please correct us. It's really hard to find actually this data or this, it's not easy to find the past on this. But just from talking to elected officials or people that have lived in this county for a long time, I've been here since 2011, which is a long time, and I guess a long time-ish. Right,
Yes,
it's
from a
been,
lot of, yes. Yeah.
but it is, it's there's, it's nice to know like who's actually been in this seat before. And I know that from my understanding, this has never been Democratic held since its conception. It's always been held by a Republican. It's not, I also don't think it's been around forever. I mean, I don't, we're not that old as a state. But I think the office was created 50, 60 years ago, and we've never had a Democrat clerk. So this is really making the voters, understand the difference between voting for a Republican and a Democrat right now. I know people don't like the two-party system. I know that they don't want us to affiliate, especially for a position like this. It's a very nonpartisan job, and that's something Angela did great, right? She kept it very nonpartisan mostly, and that's as it should be. It should be an unaffiliated job, but currently it's not. So until then, we have to be part of a party if you're going to make it on the ballot, to go through the process, to get the money, to all that fun stuff. So yeah, I just think it's important for the voters to understand the difference between voting a D and an R, Democrat and Republican. And currently that fight is because of election integrity, election securities, improvements on the process, giving fresh new change. The fact that it's been held by Republican for so long, it'd be nice to get a different perspective. Same-sex marriage, and talking about marriage protections. I think as a Democrat clerk, I would obviously fight tooth and nail to ensure it's protected, and that we change it as soon as possible. I am not sure that a Republican clerk would do that. I think they would probably go straight to what the ruling is and wait until the state does whatever they do on their process. And we're seeing this, and I wanted to bring this about earlier, is we're actually seeing states, they overturned Roe versus Wade, and what states are doing is they're reverting back to, for example, Arizona, Civil War law, in order to say, oh yeah, we're going to do a total ban abortion because this is how it was back in the 1800s, and this is what's on the books in our state. And currently, yet again, Colorado constitutional says man versus woman. It's a man and woman is how marriage is done in Colorado. So people need to realize that there are things on the line when you are making these choices. And Larimer County in 2022 voted for Angela, and she won by a lot when a lot of Democrats won. And she had about 20,000 Democrats vote for her. And I will tell people all day long, I was one of those Democrats that voted for her back in 2022 because I thought she was doing nothing wrong, and I knew that she was doing totally great with the job. But that's changed. You have someone who knows how to campaign, myself, and a strong Democrat that is out there really fighting to talk about the policies that want to change in this office. Another one that people don't realize is collective bargaining. The counties have the power now to organize. The county staff has the power to organize now if they want to. And that is something Angela, I'm not sure where Tina Harris is the current clerk and recorder, where she stands on it, but I know Angela was anti-collective bargaining. As a Democrat, I'm very pro-union. I would love to see if the county staff want to organize and fight for pay or whatever benefits they need. I would love to see that happen. So, those are where your differences come in. You're making sure you're choosing your options here and looking at that there is a true difference between policies and that we're trying to enforce come this November. when you're picking one of us.
Yeah. One thing that hasn't came up yet that is at the top of my mind is accessibility. So I know that that has been a big deal, and that was a local decision. And there was financial reasons for it in part, which I understand is a challenge that everybody has to deal with. But um, accessibility was cut back significantly, right? So all of the places that were available here in Loveland went from, I don't know, 10 or 15 to 2, less hours. So the line that existed was obscene, actually. And then there were, like, most of our communities didn't have places at all, right? Or they were just a really short window. And so what ends up happening is that the people who are impacted the most are the ones who are also impacted the most by policy, right? So there's a reason that those decisions are made. And that decision was not made by Angela. That was not made by other decision makers in the county. That was made by the person who's sitting in the seat today, who is your opponent. And that was conscious. And whether their intention was to silence voices almost doesn't matter, because the voices were silenced. And there were people who were doing that and saying to do that on purpose. So even if it did come down to a budget reason, it still had an impact. And there are other ways to solve budget challenges. So that's another thing that I think is a significant thing that is actually about, like, definitely comparing you and your opponent, and just one big way that you're making different kinds of decisions, that I think is worth talking about too.
I think accessibility is huge, and in my campaign, my three words or key terms that I love to talk about is transparency, efficiency. I can say these words: efficiency, accessibility. And we ran into this issue actually in 2023. It was a decision made from our understanding. I don't think it was made by Angela. I think it was made by Tina. Um, uh, but to cut back hours on in-person voting centers in 3 locations. One of them was in Loveland. The other one was Front Range Community College. And then the other one was in Estes Park. And the reason given was budget, which is after looking at the reason and whatnot, it makes sense why it could be a reason. But it's the way that the process was done that needs to be improved upon. So meaning, like, we do have budgets that we live by, right? Is an area of cutting back on in-person voting because of staffing issues, or you have in Estes Park, I think they used, like, they were open for 10 to 14 days and they only had 90 people show up in that amount of time. And is that a good use of resources? That's an argument that you can have, but it was the fact that the decision was made without community input. There was zero community input. There was no, let me go to Estes and talk to the town board or the mayor, or go talk to the community and have a community forum and be like, do we really need this long of time? Should we shorten it? There was no kind of feedback. It was just a decision that was made, and it didn't go well. It didn't go over well. That since then, apparently this decision has been reversed. And all the voting centers are back open. And people are like, we live in Colorado. This is a vote now state. Yes, that is correct. The reason why we have these centers is because it gives people options. They can go vote in person if they choose to. And then also, it's where you go get your replacement ballot. If you spill coffee, you spill wine, you spill a drink, you tear it by accident as you're opening it up, you are going to get the replacement ballot, because that could cause it to be rejected if you vote with a smudge on it or something. So you want to make sure you go get a clean ballot And that's where you go to get your replacement ballots, are these voting centers. So these do have a purpose, of why they exist. Uh, uh, and we could have, a conversation about why these three communities were specifically chosen. I don't know why. We can all make assumptions. I think at the end of the day, um, it was just a decision that had. I understand that it was because of budget. I think realizing after the impact it had, without having that community input, it was not a correct decision, and she reversed it. And I think that's appropriate. I'm glad she decided to expend the hours and bring it back. Especially what was concerning is we didn't want to see this effect on a presidential year. We know turnout is extremely high in a presidential year, especially in Larimer County. Our turnout, I think, in 2020 was almost 92%, which is crazy. Usually it is not like that in off cycles. And you, as a school board director, I'm sure you see that it is a lot less during 2023 election, but it was still a good, decent turnout in 2023. So we just need to make sure that we're always, this is where accessibility comes into play, but also being transparent and going to your communities and really engaging with them and understanding how it's going to impact them. If it's a negative impact, especially, how do we improve? Um, so that's just something I would love to talk about. And I think it's also why I've also earned a lot of the mayor endorsements throughout the county. I have Berthoud support, Wellington support, and Fort Collins support. And it's because I do focus on the local aspects of the job and how these communities are affected on everything. So we just make sure that we're really, really trying to get the community involved moving forward. But as you're talking about accessibility, a new issue has come up, and this would be Spanish ballots.
Oh,
Uh,
yes. Yes.
so it is something that has come up and has been approached to the county clerk currently. And I know they're running into some issues trying to get some points across. And it's something that I definitely want to look at as the next clerk. I think it's working with Boulder and seeing how they do it. It's working with Weld. Weld has probably, I think, one of the largest Hispanic or Spanish speaking reading populations. So how does Weld do it? How does counties like Jefferson County do it? But this has also come up in state legislation. So they actually are starting to talk about it in the state legislature. And I think it's up in a bill currently of giving counties options and processes to go through to start this process. But we are growing in that population. So in the Latino population. And so how do we make sure we are being inclusive and making sure we're accessible in these options? I don't think it should be a cost thing. I mean, if it is, in my opinion, elections should never be a cost issue. We should always making sure that we are putting the money where it is for protections or whatever it is for elections, and then we look at other areas. But it's also that community engagement part of it too. Are we going to these communities and talking to them and making an understanding, and are they feeling left out? And it's just across the board. So it's a new issue that has come up, and I great that it's been brought to my attention and plenty of people's attention because it is now at the state legislature. But I'm excited to see this one improve, not just here, but across the state also.
It strikes me as well that this comes back to one of your advantages, right? Which is the data. So part of how to make these decisions is by understanding. So you talked about the community input, which is huge and also important, but understanding where we have impacts because we're familiar with the data and because we're looking at it and we really spend the time doing that is a big deal as well, because I think that you look at how these decisions impact places, and some things become more clear when you look at how many people in Estes are retired versus how many people in Fort Collins are on a college campus already, right? And I mean, those things shake out. There's lots of ways to look at it. And I am glad that you have that view into um, how to make decisions as well, because you know you get more options when you understand the ins and the outs, and you pair that with being comfortable talking to people. It's a nice full circle to make sure that what you think looks good in the data actually works for real people, and vice versa, that what works for real people actually works with what you have to work with. And so I appreciate that that's all part of how you make a decision, that it's not one or the other. And I know that matters with every single thing we've talked about here. Um, and with that said, I can't believe how long it's been. For anybody who's listening, you've probably done your dishes a lot longer than you normally do. Hopefully, you were making some amazing dinner and now dessert. Because clearly we could talk all day. And so it sounds like we should wrap it up for now, but I'd love to have you back. I'd love to talk more about, some of the ins and outs of some of this, some of the data behind some of our county. I think is you have a unique perspective on that I know you dig into, that it would be helpful for people to know kind of who we are right now and how we are also different than we have been. We're changing every day. So I'd love to have you back. I'm really grateful for your time. And I hope that everybody gets involved. So as you've been watching, we do have Wyatt's QR code on the screen and his campaign information. So there are ways to get involved and get engaged. And that is a big, important thing to do right now, because this is a race that matters. And also it helps to have something to do and to get involved and to be engaged and informed. It really helps the nervousness that comes with all these big things happening with elections this year. So please get involved, and I will see everybody in the next few weeks. Thank you so much, Wyatt, for being here. I'm really grateful that you took the time today. Can't wait to do it again.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. And just look me up at wyattforlarimer.com. You can use the QR code that takes you to my website. Sign up to the newsletter, the volunteer, donate, whatever you can do. I greatly appreciate it. And it will be a fun summer and a fun fall. And I will definitely be back towards the fall, and we can talk more about data. And by then, we'll also have some forums under our belts, and we can talk more differences about Tina and I.
Thank you so much.
Paid for by the Larimer County Democratic Party, 604 South Mason Street, Fort Collins, Colorado, 80524, 970-689-6391. Not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee.